Joining us now to talk about how he's helping people manage the COVID-19 pandemic is Pastor Mike McClure Jr. of the Rock Church. And let me just begin, Pastor Mike, with tell me about why you decided to RIP medical debt.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And one of our missions at Rock City Church is to change lives and impact the culture. So, of course, we've given away close now 5,000 surgical masks. We've blessed churches with masks who decided to open. But I wanted to find another way to be a blessing. And my gospel song, Big, was number one in the country for 10 weeks. And I thought, what better way to celebrate going number one than to take those proceeds and be a blessing to the city that I love. And I'm just excited that we were in position to do it.
The way you unveiled what you've done was pretty much telling people, go check your inbox. Tell me about that.
So what's incredible about it is I wish I could know each individual that we bless, but seeing that we bought so much medical debt in the entire city, the only way we could do it was that RP Medical Debt literally sent a letter to each home. So for those who are watching right now, you may get a letter in your mailbox in the next 2 or 3 days that says all of your outstanding debt that was sent to collections for medical bills has been paid in full. And I thought, what better way? We've been saying this in church for the longest, checks in the mail, but I want to say paid off in the mail.
I love that. So when Big blew up in the way that it did and obviously started blessing people all over the country, what were your thoughts? Were you expecting Big to be big?
Well, it's crazy. I thought it would be a song that we would sing in our church. And I had no idea that the world would be singing it. And I want to encourage somebody who's pregnant with vision, but is often aborted by lack. You're pregnant with the business, but you never have the finances to do it. I was singing Big in my church, and the top radio promoter in the country just happened to come to our church. He pulled me to the side and said, "That's the number one song in the world." And a year later, it's the number one song in the world. So, of course, who would have thought that the world, in a couple weeks, I'll be on the Stella Awards on BET with Kirk Franklin. Who does that? From Birmingham, Alabama. So for me, I made God a promise growing up in Central Park, 1501 51st Street, Ansley. I sat there and said, God, if you ever bless me, I'm going to turn around and be a blessing. And I want to keep my promise to God.
And so while this pandemic has slowed so many things, I noticed that you have been out in the forefront, standing side by side with city leadership to speak to that spiritual need for people, but also just the practical part. When churches were making that decision about reopening, you had some information that you wanted to partake. Can you talk a little bit about that? And I love that you called Noah the king of quarantine.
Hey, you've been listening. Noah, the king of quarantine. Well, we know that COVID-19 is impacting African Americans at a disproportionate rate. And Birmingham being the epicenter of African Americans with pre-existing issues. As a pastor, I have to be careful and cautious on when we congregate. And if I needed biblical wisdom, we can look no further than to the king of quarantine, Noah, that although the rain has stopped, the water has subsided, he said, I'm not leaving until God says so. So for anyone watching right now, I'm gonna just admonish you to remain careful. Although cases are going up, we have to remain cautious, remain careful, and trust God in the midst of the process.
And so in that part, you know, where we are, I remember about a year and a half ago, you came forward, you talked and helped try to bridge some gaps in the community over the E.J. Bradford shooting. Where we are today, right now with this pandemic and what's happening in Minneapolis, do you have a word for people right now who are really struggling with some of the realities of what's happening in the Black community?
In the midst of this difficult, arduous season, who would have thought we would be dealing with corruption and corona, a pandemic and police? And here it is again. It was Martin Luther King who said that rioting is the voice of the unheard, meaning that after we've tried to be silent for so long, pain tends to come out sideways. And if I can encourage anyone to remain hopeful and remain faithful, is that now is not the time to just cautiously pass by. It was Dr. King who said, in the end, we will remember not the words of our critics, but the silence of our friends. And now is the time for those Black, white, intellectual, illiterate, rich, poor to come together and let our voice be heard. Think about how much pressure is on the African American community right now. They're telling us that COVID impacts us at a disproportionate rate. Now, once again, a brother is saying, I can't breathe again. So, what do we do when enough is enough?
And so the spiritual need that's happening right now, because there is this sort of despair. People are fearful of coronavirus. People are fearful of what the future looks like. And you started this year with a message for all of us when we were looking forward to the Stellar Awards that it's gonna be big. How do you encourage people through all of this that it's still gonna be big?
I'm reminded of a story of a lady who had a son that she loved, and she raised that son. She cared for that son. She nurtured that son. That son was mocked the entire time he grew up. And when we find him as an adult, he's on a cross. And she looks at him and she can barely recognize him. With tears in her eyes, she's screaming and she's crying. And then Jesus looks at his mother and says, Woman, behold your son. In the midst of that crucifixion, in the midst of one of the most painful moments in the history, he looks at two men on the cross, and one man, they have two options. One man says, he's nobody special. Another man says, when you get into your kingdom, remember me. He turns to that man and says, today you will be with me in paradise. And I believe we're faced with two options right now. Do we become that brother on the cross who just lives in doubt? Or do we grab hold to the little faith we have and say, in spite of the pandemic, I still believe the promise. Here it is, because in the midst of quarantine, people are still being blessed. In the midst of sickness, people are still being healed. And I believe if we keep the faith, this year is still going to be.
Hallelujah. Pastor Mike, that was just awesome. I want to thank you. People are going to get that blessing in the mail, find out the bill's already paid on those medical bills. Is there anything you want to add?
I just want to let our city know that we love you. We're praying for you. I want you to know right now that now is not the time to be divisive, but to stand united. I want to commend our mayor for how you've been leading through this time, our city councilman, especially Councilman Woods and Smitherman. What you guys have been doing has been a blessing. Hoyt, all that you have been doing, LaShonda Scales and Sheila Tysons and every pastor. I am so honored to see so many pastors feeding people and blessing people. And I believe if we remain united, once again, Birmingham can be a place of reconciliation and change. And I believe it's going to happen, and we're going to see God do something big.
Pastor Mike McClure Jr., Rock City Church, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
That was so awesome.
Oh, thank you
Mickey,
so much.
you need to let me run the whole interview in the news. She said she's inspired. Let me tell you, I have a girlfriend in Washington, D.C. who was diagnosed with coronavirus. She, her son, and her nephew. She somehow found your church service.
Wow.
And it has been such a blessing to her. And she kept saying to me, Sherry, he's right in your city. Do you know who this is? I was like, yeah, I know who he is. So I can't wait to share this with her. But you blessed her in just a special way, because the fear, being afraid to go to sleep at night, not knowing if she was going to wake up, I mean, it really, really rocked her. And something in you motivated her, something in your word encouraged her.
Well, I thank God for you too. And I think I've been telling everybody, one of the blessings of quarantine for me has been I got a chance to slow down. I think people like you and I, we move so fast that God does so much in our lives, we never really enjoy it. So for us going virtual, we went from about 300 people online to now, I think this week it was 70,000.
How about that?
It's just a blessing. So tell your girlfriend I said hello. I can't wait to pray with her.
Thank you, Pastor Mike.
May God bless you.
God bless you. Take care.